Hi, I'm Robert Oxnam. I'm probably best known as an Asia specialist. I used to be president of the Asia Society. Spent a lot of my time focusing on China, writing books, taking people to China. But that's not why I want to talk to you today. There was a whole other side to my life that is the topic of a book that I recently published called A Fractured Mind, My Life with Multiple Personality Disorder. I do have D.I.D. It was diagnosed about 15 years ago. We have to make a message about D.I.D. And that is, it does exist. It should not be controversial. It is a child's response to enormous trauma. How do you deal with that trauma? One alternative, it turns out, is to fracture, to have parts of you that remember and parts of you that say that's an unbearable memory. I'm going to go ahead and be a creative actor in the outside world.
I believe I developed D.I.D. by the physical and emotional abuse that I went through, sexual abuse also. And I actually don't really remember much before the age of 12. I kind of blocked it out. I think I made a little door within myself to hide from everything.
My understanding of D.I.D. in my experience came from childhood trauma, extensive trauma that was repeated, not ending and not feeling safe.
It was really hard to accept it at first, and still sometimes is.
Actually, it took a long time for me to be diagnosed. I met with a number of therapists. I had several hospitalization stays. I didn't want people to know that I was hearing things because I thought I was crazy. And I was afraid if I answered people's questions correctly, they'd know I was crazy.
It's essentially a protective mechanism which said it's a horrible memory. You can bottle it up, you can keep it in one part of your internal structure, and you can live a life outside of that.
You've just heard a sampling of what it's like to be diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, or D.I.D., formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Now, to most people, including those that are diagnosed, the idea that one could have separate identities or personalities that they have little or no awareness of seems unbelievable. Yet we're going to find that it's much more common than most people realize. We're going to learn how the body is like a house that can have many different personalities. Inside each house is an inner family that one might not be aware exists. When you have D.I.D., these personalities often think and act as if they're the only resident, creating confusion, memory difficulties, and chaos for those who struggle with the disorder.
I don't know who I am anymore. Confusion plagues me in my mind. Memories surface. Memories disappear.
I was pretty self-destructive. I drank a lot. I cut. I had numerous suicide attempts. I was depressed. And I heard voices. My head was always lost.
Before I was diagnosed with D.I.D., there were all kinds of issues that I found very perplexing. There were blackouts. There were periods of time where I have no memory of what happened. In addition to that, I remember enormous rages. I would be set off and anger would just suddenly well up in me. I was drinking very heavily, and people said, aha, it must be alcoholism. You have blackouts with alcoholism. People sometimes get very angry with alcoholism. So it must be something else. I went to a number of different therapists, and they were all going around the edges of it.
Sometimes I could do something really, really well, and then in the middle of it when I was doing it, all of a sudden I couldn't do it anymore.
How does dissociating contribute to the development of D.I.D.?
Well, dissociation is a normal process that we all have capabilities of exhibiting at one time or another. And it's an extremely common response to trauma. They are helpless and unable to fight or flee, so they dissociate, zone out, go somewhere else mentally, or even become someone else, someone who isn't abused or mistreated. As they're off becoming someone else in their mind, They're not aware that their body remains. Some part of them is still being neglected, abused, or traumatized, creating the process in which a traumatized identity or ego state
So
develops.
just who are these other personalities?
I don't know how old the first one is. I consider her about 8. Kind of given up on things. Used to being abused. Just doesn't talk to anybody, just doesn't let anybody in, just kind of in her own little box. I have another personality, appears to be in her teens, early
It's
teens.
natural for a young boy to pick a castle, which is just the way we've looked at the world through much of our lives, as if through a castle from the inside out. And Robert, lived all these years inside the living room of the castle, looking at a fireplace, coming up with what I thought were great insights and ways of teaching. Bobby lived in the dungeon of the castle, perpetual adolescent, a guy who has all the creativity and the joy and the energy, but he also believes that he's bad and that he deserved the abuse. And he sometimes comes out today, and he's become somewhat well known as a rollerblader who goes off on weekends and balances bottles on his head. So what you're seeing is that there's an inside dimension to all of this, which had very few manifestations on the outside. And then there are outside personalities who were clueless about what was happening on the inside.
Let's hear what it's like for those who know and care about someone with DID.
There was no way for me to recognize when you were switching. I recognized emotions, but not the fact that there was a different
While
person.
you hear people that they are wondering whether this disorder exists, or how could it be because they've seen Robert being such an accomplished person, couldn't they have seen this? And I really find it very maddening, because the truth is I've lived with him. I have lived with the disorder. I have seen it firsthand. And for people to question, it's sort of like actually saying, you know, you suffered, but I don't believe that you suffered. And I think that that in itself is something, is like a second abuse. First of all, people, if they haven't experienced it, it doesn't mean that they should question it. They should simply say, I haven't experienced it. I have.
Some are just starting, some are further along, and some are either very close to or have achieved their goals of
I'm coming to the point now where I've softened a little, and I'm learning to embrace myself, all the parts of me.
Progress to more gentle figures in a more cooperative.
To have someone actually recognize my symptoms and finally having an explanation that makes sense. It explains so much.
Since I've started treatment, things have gotten much better. I used to just want to get rid of these parts of me. They were just awful parts of me. I hated them. And I learned that you can't get rid of them. You need to kind of integrate it into your life.
Hopefully you now know a little more about dissociative identity disorder, and that it's not as crazy as it seems. And if you have DID, you can know you're not as crazy as you feel, and that there is hope.